The real us is pure light, pure love. Ooh, did anybody else get tingles with that one? Hey guys, it's the Mindfulness Sherpa from Painted Porch Strategies. I am joined by the beautiful Amy Yakowski. Amy, give us a little wave. Oh, there she is. And our Master of Communications, Rob Hunter. Hi, Rob. And we have joined together on the porch for our book club. This is our final week of this guy right here, The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And I'm just brought back to really the true simplicity of this book, is that he says in Toltec wisdom, every living thing is connected to the light. And the light is the creator or the one or the universe or whatever, label you put on that file folder. We are all connected to a divine source. And if we are all connected to a divine source, then that means we are all divine, we are all light, we are all love. And this is such like a kumbaya kind of a feeling, but this is really where he's rooting all four of these agreements to. So guys, tell me how it's been going. We've read the four agreements. We're kind of wrapping everything up with a bow. Tell me what you think. I'm gonna go to Rob first. What do you think, Rob?
I love the simplicity of the entire book because it really puts it all into perspective in the most concise way possible. And he leaves it up to you to figure out how to do it, really. But the biggest part that I get from his takeaway is that repetitive processes. Write it down. Put things on a Post-it note. Put it on your refrigerator where you see it all the time, because when you see it, you start to do it. You see it more, you start to do it. Add it to your calendar on your phone, so just so you pops up in your head. And I like that tie it all together. I really love the analogy of the parasite, because one of the things that I say in my communications course, which will help you become a better communicator, is that you have to understand your inner workings. You have to understand how you talk to yourself, because that's where it all starts. And that's where he starts, which is what I really loved. And the parasite analogy is similar to mine, that language is contagious. So what you say has the ability to impact other people, either as an infection or, to go back to what you just said, Sierra, the light. So what are you saying? How are you saying it? And understanding that you might infect people with negative energy like a parasite if you aren't careful.
I don't know how to follow up with that. That was really good. No, I agree, Rob.
Wow, that was some good stuff right there. We did record that.
Yeah. He sometimes says some smart things that our MC here, our master of communication. No, but I agree. I love the parasite. And I think you even touch on this, Rob, in Master Your Message, where sometimes you want to intentionally choose words that are a little bit like, ooh, a parasite. That's a pretty, there's a very immediate image that comes to mind when you say parasite, as opposed to just saying, oh, it's a limiting belief. It's like, no, it's a parasite. It is eating you up. It is eating away at you. It's eating away, and it's destroying and infecting your ability to, as you talked about, Sierra, be the light. And I think that's such a powerful choice to use. Originally, it's interesting. Talking to one of our other book club members who was reading this, at first, when she started reading it, she was like, this is kind of weird. Like when she first started the book, this is kind of weird. I'm not sure. And I'm like, stick around, just stick with it. Trust me. And now I think it's one of her favorite books that she's ever read now. She loves the Four Agreements and loves the specific four agreements that are talked about here, and is really starting to think differently about what parasite she might have, and what agreement she wants to rewrite, her domestication that she wants to rewrite. So I love the power of that language of parasite.
So he uses the term domestication to mean the things that we have been taught by whoever has been teaching us in our head up to this point. And it's interesting because there's he talks about attention. Your first attention is not one that you chose. So your domestication, whatever you taught or whether somebody sat you down and said, all right, I'm going to teach you the English alphabet, or, numbers, or you are taught that by example, like maybe an example that your parents showed you or somebody who was influential in your early years. This was not your choice. These were just kind of things that were presented. But he talks about in your second agreement. And your second agreement is when you are actually choosing the things that you agree with. Agreement meaning something you agree with. So someone says something to you or presents something and you have a choice. You either accept it and agree and say, yeah, okay, let's operate on that rule or on that ruling, or you can reject that. So before I get too ahead of myself, so I just want to remind you where we are in the book. He has presented the 4 agreements, which, just to review, class, is number 1, be impeccable with your word. Your word can mean your verbal words or your actions, the things that really are your truth. Number 2, don't take anything personally. Number 3, don't make assumptions. And number 4, always do your best. And these 4 very open to interpretation rules are what he says is the key to choosing the agreement or choosing the life that you want to choose. So before we hop forward with how he thinks you can utilize this, as you guys have had some time to sit with these 4 agreements, did anything come up?
Specific to the agreements. So I think they're all good. What I do love is how he kind of advises us, start with one, pick one. Don't try to take them all on at once. We talked about that even back in our very first book club, which was a 52-week journey learning about Stoicism. And we talked about how there's so many amazing lessons that we can learn and we can apply in our lives, but it can feel a little overwhelming to try to do them all at once. And so I do appreciate and respect that he said, listen, to get rid of a parasite, it's going to take time. It's going to take some time. It's going to take a little grace. It's going to take patience. And to your point, it's going to take intention and attention. And start with one. And, I just naturally gravitated to starting with the very first one, be impeccable with your word, because that really can be that foundational piece. If you're, pardon my language, if you're shit talking to yourself or you're shit talking to other people, that's just going to keep perpetuating and feeding that parasite and not allow you to move past your past.
And he does say that if you're going to pick only one, that's a great one to pick.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's going to the root of it. If you go to impeccable with your word, impeccable with what you say, and impeccable with what you do, which means not going against yourself, right? So impeccable doesn't mean you're doing things perfectly, doesn't mean that at all. It means you are being true to yourself and you're not going against yourself. He says if you do this one, the other stuff kind of sorts itself out. Mm-hmm. So Rob, what about you? Did you put your focus on one of the agreements above the others and you started this practice?
I don't really think so, because I think that the principles in this book are the principles of all personal development. So having started down a personal development path several years ago, I felt as I was reading the book that I was halfway there already. So I wasn't starting at the beginning, because I've already done the work about not making assumptions and not taking things personally. Doesn't mean I'm perfect at it. Doesn't mean that's always the case, but I'm aware. I'm like, oh, so for example, if Amy says something to me and I react, I'm like, oh, that's on me. So instead of blaming her, I'm like, okay, why did I react that way? So that's that don't take it personally. It's that moment to learn. And that's where I think for me, this was a reminder that you gotta do the work. The only time you're going to grow, the only time you're going to be in all these 4 rules is by doing the work. This is an area where there are no shortcuts. You might be able to figure out how to create one later. I happen to have a tool that I love that I use that's in my course as well, called Writing a Rap, which helps me dig into the issues. So having arrived at this book in the middle of this process, it's that recommitment to continue to do the work. Because I'll be frank, so Amy and I have been to a few Tony Robbins events, and I look at Tony Robbins, I'm like, man, that guy is dynamic. He's good. And I was like, I need to be like that energy all the time. And Tony Robbins is like this. And I'm like, wait a second. Tony Robbins is not always like that. He's like that when he performs. He's not like that when he's sitting on his couch at home. He's not like, so that image of what I expected that I needed to be in this book kind of grounded me to realize, no, Tony Robbins is Tony Robbins. Rob Hunter is Rob Hunter. Rob Hunter does not and should not try to become someone else to prove who he is. It's just being number 4, the best version of me. So I guess to answer that question in a long roundabout way, Sierra, is in the middle of that process, that 4th rule was the one that really was that reinforcer for me to always do your best.
Very, very well said. And I think that was a very powerful one, because he does remind us, like, give us grace of, as far as what your best is right now. And one of the reasons that was my favorite is he really, in a roundabout way, he talks about always doing your best is just being present. Mm-hmm. And you also touched on something about how really so many of these core concepts align with so many other philosophies and religions. There were a lot of ties that tied right into Stoicism. We are here on the porch, we are rooted in Stoicism, Stoic values. But he even talks about it near the end as he's kind of wrapping up the story. Whatever label you attach to this, whatever, he was talking about your version of heaven. It could be just a freedom. Whatever that is, like, you can choose that by your actions and by what you choose to allow you to make you suffer or to make you joyful. But it's not a religion. It's not like, oh, you have to believe this and exclusively this. This ties so well with so many other lineages, regardless of what you call higher power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you touched on the freedom aspect, and he starts this wrap-up section really calling that out about the idea of freedom. And he says, here, even in the United States, we're big on freedom, but the reality is that we are not free. And what he means by that is that we are not free to be ourselves, to be our true selves, our authentic selves, our, real self, free to be you and me, right? And he says, instead, what we're doing is most of the time we are living and behaving to please others, to get some sort of reward or recognition, to be accepted, instead of being ourselves. And he compares it to children. He's like, children just, they don't think about it. They are who they are. They do what they do. They say what they want to say, and they are their full authentic selves. Mm-hmm. It's only as that domestication starts to come in that they start compromising on themselves and who they truly are. And he really says, ultimately, the goal of all of this is to be free to be you. And I loved that. I thought that was a beautiful message.
So he gives us a couple of tools, a couple of options for how to break the old agreement. So he says, you can't just throw the old agreements in with the new agreements and expect them to get along. It doesn't work like that. We have to get rid of the old ones and replace them with the new ones. So Rob, you mentioned about repeating what the new ones are. He says, yeah, that's great. He's like, but we also have to get rid of some of the old ones. Okay, how do I do that? 3 different possible ways. The first is the dream of the second attention. And I mentioned first attention wasn't your choice. That was your not conditioning. What's the term he uses? Domestication. Yes. That was domestication. That wasn't your choice. That was put upon you. But now you get your second agreement, your choice of a reality. I think of like agreement is your reality or your operating SOP, standard operating procedure, right? So we're going to do away with, I'll just use an example. I'm going to put away I'm stupid, and I'm going to replace with I'm capable, I need to keep trying, right? Mm-hmm. The second option he gives us is the disciplined warrior. Now I'm gonna diverge for a second because he says warrior is an important word. Rob, you'll love this choice of word because a warrior is someone who goes against an agreement they don't agree with, a first agreement. So if you were taught the agreement of you are stupid and you want to disagree with that, you want to go against that, you are a warrior. You are going to fight against the stupid agreement. Okay? So at this point, now we have to fight, warrior, against that old agreement and control our own behavior. So this is where we need to decide to choose love instead of fear. And sometimes you have to claw your way to fight for that love as opposed to the fear of if that was a first agreement that was placed.
Mm-hmm.
Every time you hear that voice, yeah, you're stupid, or, you know, for me, it's, oh, you're blonde, oh, you're female, oh, you're whatever this is, I have to fight against that and say, my hair color doesn't matter, my gender doesn't matter, my ideas and my merit are what matters, and that's what I have control over. So that's me being my discipline warrior, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the third option he gives us, this one, at first when I read it, I was like, what? And I mean, this is your mindfulness Sherpa going, what? So you know it was a little weird. He says, the initiation of the dead and embracing death. At first I'm like, initiation of the dead? Like, what are we going to walk around the cemetery? Like, what are we doing? I kept reading. And this one aligns so well, Amy, I would love for you to speak on this, to embracing the idea we are all mortal, which is at a direct link to Stoicism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I even made a note in the margin about it. You know, there's a phrase, memento mori, which basically means recognize that you're going to die. You're going to die. We're all mortal, and you can die at any moment. It can happen. You can't plan it. You're not in charge of that. You're not in charge of when death comes knocking at your door. And I absolutely love that because it sounds like a grim practice. You know, we talk about it in our Stoic book series that we have. If you want to check that out, definitely go check that one out. But we talk about embracing the idea of your impermanence. And they are big on practicing that. I'm going to misquote it. I'm going to paraphrase, but there's a lot of quotes by our Stoic dudes that we tend to follow, Marcus Aurelius and Seneca and Epictetus, that are akin to, you know, live each day as if you're last. If you died tomorrow, how would you want to be remembered? Do you want to do so? Always act as if this might be the last opportunity. Now that can sometimes make it a little bit extreme. It's not like YOLO, you know, all the time. It's not like, well, I'm not going to pay my bills because I might die tomorrow. But it's thinking about how you show up as a person, how you live your best life. You know, it made me, when I thought about the Stoics, it's like Scrooge. Scrooge is a perfect example of that, or A Christmas Carol. You know, it's only once Scrooge was confronted with his mortality, where he was, you know, when he met death, that third angel, and that third angel came and showed him what his future looked like, that was his slap in the face where he says, oh, I got to do things differently. I don't want to be remembered this way. I don't want to continue to behave this way. So it was only once he confronted his death, he did an imitation of death or initiation of the dead for himself, that he then said, all right, reboot. I gotta do things differently going forward. How about you, Rob?
You got to face your fears. I mean, that's what it is. All the fears that you have are what he talks about, the collection of some type of negative experience that you had. But as he points out, Don Miguel Ruiz, it's all a dream. Like Biggie Smalls in the last verse of Juicy. It was all a dream. You know, because everything is not real. The only thing real is right now. That's literally the only thing that's real. So if you're hanging on to something that's already passed, it doesn't matter anymore. It's gone. Like that's facing your demons and facing your fears and understanding, yes, that bad thing that happened to you way back in the day when you were 5, 7, 8 years old that we hang on to because it defines us, doesn't have to define you. For example, my parents' divorce. I used that to define me for like 30 years until I finally said, hell with that. and faced that fear and faced that demon and said, I got to deal with this, and had to do the work. Like, that's it. You got to do the work. Like, you got fears. Great. Every one of us does in some way, shape, or form. Part of being human, but it doesn't mean they're real. They were a moment in the past where your body tried to keep you alive, and now it's trying to remind you of that lesson, which we're not running around in the desert anymore chasing rattlesnakes, right? We have homes. We have the threats of fight and flight in 2022 are way different than they were in 1122 or 22 or BC. So we have not updated, right? We have not evolved. Our brains haven't with the fear techniques until you do this work. This is like you installing new software. You know, you're putting in version 2.0 or 4.0 or 9.0. You constantly have to redo your brain, your body, your mind-body connection, all the things that he's talking about.
And you got to start by killing the bug, right? You got to kill that parasite. It's got to die.
Yes. It's the only way to get help.
He does say straight up, he's like, look, this is not impossible, but you will have to look at this. But ultimately, like, you can keep doing the parasite, the judge, the victim. He talks about that in the Toltec wisdom. He's like, but does that make you happy? For most people, no, that it makes a lot of suffering. It makes us stressed. It makes us nervous. It makes us feel like we're never good enough. So if you say you want to be happy and you want to be at peace, then this is what you need to do in order to choose that. And it does require that you continually look at yourself, and that you also are okay with the fact that not everybody might like you. But that, again, has more to do with that smoke in the mirror. Remember, as I said in the beginning, the most simple part of this is, if we are all part of the same divinity, if we are all divine, if we are all light, if we are all from the same star stuff, then that is our true state of being. Happiness, joy, contentedness, that is our true state. It's these false agreements, these crap things that we keep letting rule our show, that is the smoke that gets in the way of one mirror reflecting another mirror, reflecting that light. So he says, people might not like you for being yourself. They might not like your word. They might not like you not making assumptions, asking a lot of questions. But you know what? That's not up to you to control anyway. If you just are true to yourself and do the best that you can in the present, then just do that. And just, it's to simplify way, like you do you and I do me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and again, it all goes back to where he says, you can say, I want to feel better. I don't want to, behave this way, or I don't want to have this old agreement. But you first have to recognize what that agreement is. He talks about that awareness. It's not just positive thinking. It's not like, I'm great. No, you have to recognize that you're telling yourself you're not great. Whatever that agreement is, and dig deep into that. That's where, Rob, your rap is a great tool to do that. Dig deep, get a little deeper into the why around it, so that you recognize what that old, not good agreement is. So that way you can specifically target it and then rewrite it and kill it and then rewrite it. You think about it, it's like if someone has cancer, it's a similar premise. They go to chemo to kill those cancer cells. They got to kill those cells so that way they can then attack the cancer. It's the same principle here. You have to target it. You have to be very focused on what it is you want to rewrite, not just saying, oh, I don't want to feel this way anymore.
Right. It actually takes the action piece of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the work, and this is the other part too, that I think that I don't know if a lot of people miss this, but the work is very fulfilling. So when you start doing the work on yourself and you start uncovering things, and everybody's going to have a different method, something that works for you that might not work for me, or something that works for me doesn't work for you. But the more that I've done this work and understanding myself and understanding where those fears and negative thoughts come from, the better I feel about life in general, the better I feel about waking up in the morning and doing difficult tasks. Even though you go through some tough emotions, you look at them differently. You don't go, oh, well, there I go again. You're like, ooh, what is this? And why is this so difficult? And then you can appreciate the fact that you get to have that experience, because elephants don't get to have this experience, right? They have a different experience. We have much more complex thoughts, much more complex feelings, much more complex avenues, an infinite amount of ways to interpret everything that we can translate into language. So having that experience in and of itself sets us apart from almost every other known living species. So if you can focus on that we get to do this as a human, no matter your lot in life, is absolutely incredibly amazing. For the short time that we get to have, you start shifting your perspective, and life sucks, life is suffering. And even when it is suffering, you're like, I'm still alive and I'm still a human and I still get to experience anger, loss. Not that it's easy, because it sucks going through those things, but it's just a feeling. That's it. It doesn't mean anything more than just a feeling, other than the meaning you assign to it with our language. In our, oh, that emotion must mean this. Because when you think about it, you get an emotion, you automatically try to figure out what it is. Oh, okay, it's this. So I should not do that again because I feel this way. It's just a feeling. Like if you're in a real life or death situation, completely different story, but that rarely happens to us.
Yeah.
And he says, once you feel what it means to live in a state of bliss, you will love it. You will know that heaven on earth is truth. The world is very beautiful and very wonderful. Life can be very easy when love is your way of life. You can be loving all the time. This is your choice. Love will give you inner peace. It will change your perception of everything. He even talks about how if you just go around and look at everything as a miracle and everything as love, then all of a sudden, when your perception of everything being love, even somebody who's angry with you, he says, when I see somebody who's angry with me, I think I love you. And so when you perceive it like that, you're letting that light sort of try to bounce back. And he does, I love how he talks about how this is a heaven on earth that is possible. And he says, Moses called it the promised land, Buddha called it nirvana, Jesus called it heaven, and the Toltecs call it a new dream. So this is a choice that you are making to move towards that side of love and away from fear. Now, fear is an important tool. It is important to understand what fear is, but unravel where this is really coming from. And it's interesting how he talks about how it can take time for these conditions of old agreements to change. And I want to share with you an experience that I had personally. So for a lot of my life, I had a very irrational fear of blood. It is called hemophobia, and it is a medical condition. And when I say a fear of blood, I don't mean I just felt afraid. I would pass out. And not from a lot of blood. I would get a paper cut on my finger, a drop of blood, and I would pass out. And my brain would shut off. And I did a little research about this, and it said, most people who have this had something traumatic happen with blood. I didn't know what that was. I asked my parents if something happened. They said, no, we don't know. But I was so used to, I could never even look at an illustration of a book with blood in it. I would pass out. So long story short, I saw a hypnotherapist and I actually faced this fear of blood that I had. I did about 3 sessions of work with this hypnotherapist. I worked with mantras. We got to the bottom of where that fear of blood had come from. And then I worked towards changing that agreement. So I had a new agreement set up that I had chosen that I wasn't going to let blood rule my life. I wasn't going to let me make it unconscious. But this was tested. So it was about a day after I finished my last session with this hypnotherapist. I turn on the television and I'm scrolling through the channels, and somehow I land on, they sometimes televise knee replacement surgeries on channels. I landed on that channel, okay? And it's that knee is open, it's gory. I immediately went, oh, and turned away. Because I was so used to that old agreement where I could not look at it without passing out. And I felt myself literally do the, oh, and I was like, wait a minute, I'm not doing that. And before I turned back, I said, I repeated my mantra, blood doesn't hurt me. I'm okay. I'm safe. I'm not going to die, blah, blah, blah. I'd said my mantra, and then I looked at the screen again with this new agreement, calming myself down all the time. And I watched this, and I was fine. And I was like, wow, I hadn't realized quite how ingrained that old agreement was until I automatically had that response. I had to calm myself down, talk myself off the ledge, and go back to my mantra. And I think what he's reminding us here with some of these steps with breaking the old agreements is that you will have to continually fight these old agreements when they come up. You will have to continue to be a warrior for choosing this heaven on earth, choosing this peace, this joy. And I discovered that firsthand. I think these are fantastic agreements, fantastic ideas. But I'm curious, guys, do you think you will continue to utilize these agreements? Do you see value in this in your everyday life?
I will say 100%. I actually am going to write them down and post them on, I think I'm going to put them in a couple places. I'm sure that they have some lovely little, like prints or something that we could leverage here as well. But I was going to write them down just as a reminder, because you have to work at it. It has to be a constant practice. And because we're going to fall back into those bad habits, even if you killed off the old agreement and brought in the new one, keeping that space occupied. He even talks about that. Like you don't just introduce a new one. You have to get rid of the old one and introduce the new one and fill that space. That space in your mind, in your body, whatever it is, you have to fill that space. And you're going to be very intentional with that, because it's gonna lighten up, and the little space is gonna open, so like evaporate, right? Like sometimes it's gonna evaporate if you don't give it enough care and feeding. And so you have to make sure that you're constantly feeding it with that new agreement, just like you did, Sierra. Immediately there might have been like a little window there where it was like, I'm gonna slide right in. That old agreement's gonna slide right in about blood, and you were like, no, hold on. I haven't given you entry. You're like a bouncer. Be a bouncer at your own mind. You're like, wait, I got to think about it before I let you into this club, this new party that I'm celebrating. I don't want you souring the dance floor.
Rob, what do you think? Do you think you'll continue to work on these agreements?
To be honest, I'm not sure. I mean, it's in some form, yes. I'm not sure if this is the form that's for me, but the whole point in reading these books and going through this process is finding stuff that works for you. Mm-hmm. So as I mentioned, being in the middle of this type of process, I'm not sure if this is the language that I'm going to need or use, but I will continue to do this work that he spells out, whether it's his version, his language, the author, Don Miguel Ruiz, whether it's a little bit of Tony Robbins language or other personal development like Mary Morrissey. I'm going to take all the tools that I've learned and continue to use my own, which is what we talked about here, right? That's my tool that works for me. So I'm going to stick to that, because I know that it works, and I know that is what it takes, right? And here's what is a commitment that I've made. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to kill the parasite, and I know that the parasite will come back, even if I do kill it. It will come it'll be a different form, because that's what the mind does. The mind is always playing tricks on you. So you have to be ready to commit to fighting this all the time, to battling and standing up for yourself, the true version of yourself, not the domesticated version of yourself. So it's funny. It's like you're trying to become more wild, as he says. And I loved that description that he used, because the domestication is the rules, the judge, it's the beliefs, right? The agreements that you've made. The wild one is like, I'm going to try this because I'm wild. See what happens.
Unchained. Yeah. It's more like unchained, untethered. You're free, right? He's the word. You're free. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a great point, Rob, that, there's a lot of different ways that these principles can be presented. He has his way, which is a very simplistic way. It's 4 very simple statements, right? But you can take and you can rewrite them in a way that feels authentic to you. And I think the key is, Sierra, what you touched on here, but also what you spend a lot of time talking about in your program, Radical Mindfulness, is give yourself your mantra, whatever your at-hand phrase is. Identify what that is. If you're not connecting with be impeccable with your word, maybe there's a different way that you say that, or it's more specific to the particular agreement that you're trying to rewrite. And so spending a little bit of time, taking awareness and spending time to rewrite your mantra, rewrite who you now are, not who you were, but who you are now. And having that available to you, I think, is really important, whether it's using his words, using someone else's words that you connect with, or writing your own script, right? Writing your own tool.
And I think too, knowing yourself, know thyself, is, I think all of us, we kind of read this list and there might be one that we're like, yeah, that's no problem. But this one, ooh, yeah, that one's where I need to work. And this is information. And one of the things that, here on Painted Porch, through all 3 of our programs, and for us as a consulting company, we truly believe in giving you a lot of different tools to choose from, and then you selecting what's going to work for you and your team in this present moment. Because what worked a year ago might not work now. So we're going to be in the present. We're going to see where we're really at. We're going to be true and authentic, not go against ourselves. And this is information on which to work with. And everybody's going to interpret things differently. But if we assume well intent, if we assume that everybody wants to live in a joyful existence and that we all come from the light, then it's much easier to operate from that place of love, even if you have to pretend a little bit.
Good point. Well, Sierra, thank you so much for introducing us to these 4 agreements and leading us these past several weeks in our book club. This was a beautiful book, and I thank you for choosing it.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it too. So if you guys have not checked it out yet, this is the 4 agreements. Oh, hi.
Are you done?
No, I'm not.
Are you almost done?
I'm almost done. Real life, real time.
And redo. Rewind tape.
I really enjoyed this book too. I hope that you guys did as well. This is, again, this is the 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. I found this a very interesting book. And for us on Painted Porch, we truly believe in the growth mindset. So we believe we are never like fixed, done, perfect. We are always striving to evolve, get new ideas, and get better and level up. So if you're interested in leveling up, we have some ideas for you. We have some courses for you. We have an app for that. We are Painted Porch Strategies, and this is the book club. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next month.